Hi, colleagues. Welcome to this pop-up session. My name is Marta Valdez, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the resource group number 4. I would suggest we allow for a couple of extra minutes for colleagues to connect, because I see there is more and more people connecting, and then we will start then the session. Thank you. Well, so colleagues, welcome to this pop-up session, as we call them. As I say, I am Marta Valdez. I am one of the co-chairs of the resource group number 4. As you know, we started with this series of pop-up sessions back in 2020 as a spaces and flexible spaces to discuss and to present important and interesting initiatives. So as you will remember, back in 2019, members of the resource group 4, as well as others, were invited to a number of consultations related to disaster risk reduction. And these initiatives have evolved quite a lot since then. I think that the team that is leading it has been in contact with us in the resource group number 4, allowing and opening spaces for participation. Shared some weeks ago some of the advances in terms of the initiative to scale up DRR in humanitarian context. And today we are going to conduct this pop-up session that will be the opportunity for UNDRR and OCHA to share an update on the recommendations and the checklist that they have prepared, with potential opportunities to enhance DRR in humanitarian project cycle. So we are going to have today 3 presenters. So we are going to have Paola Albrito, that is the Chief of Branch, Intergovernmental Processes, Interagency Cooperation and Partnership in UNDRR, that will present the checklist and the recommendations. We will have as well a presentation of the initial findings from piloting the checklist in Pakistan, that will be conducted by Iria Tucson Kal from the Risk Knowledge and Analysis Program Officer, Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific in UNDRR. And we will have as well Greg Grimshin from OCHA, that is going to be presenting around the opportunities for scaling up DRR in the Humanitarian Program Cycle. So we will have this space for the colleagues to be presenting, and after that, we will open a space for questions, comments, and a little bit of an exchange. I wanted as well to acknowledge and to thank Marlene, sorry, Marlene Grunstrom, sorry. Apologies. As Marlene has been supporting us since the beginning and connecting with resource group number 4. So Marlene, I will give you the floor just in case you want to give a little bit of an introduction to the session, and then after we will give the floor to Paola and the rest of the colleagues. And sorry, thank you.
Thank you, Martha, and good afternoon, colleagues. It's great to see so many connected. I don't really have much to add. We've been in touch with many of you through your participation in other groups. Several of the members of the IASC Results Group 4 are also members of the UNDRR Focal Points Group. So it's good to see some of those members online here as well. But I don't really have much to add on my side, so I'll hand directly over to Paola, who will introduce the initiative and share an update on progress.
Sorry, now that I can speak better, I just wanted to remind members that we are recording the session. Yeah, so just keep in mind that we are doing so. We have been asked by several members, so that will be recorded and shared with other colleagues that didn't manage to attend today. Thank you. And Paola, over to you.
Thank you very much, Martha. A pleasure to be with all of you today. And thank you very much also for giving the floor to Marlene, that really has been instrumental also within UNDRR in order to move forward the preparation and the coordination of the guidelines. So really a pleasure to see all of us coming together for this important opportunity to share views on the recommendations. So a few slides and a few words on my side. First of all, some of you are already familiar with the recommendation and the checklist on scaling up disaster risk reduction in humanitarian action. These were developed in response to an increasing call for practical tools on how to operationalize humanitarian development collaboration at the country level. And basically, the objective is to enhance disaster risk reduction and a risk-informed approach in humanitarian and strategic planning, but also during, of course, the implementation and the monitoring. The guidelines are against a background that you know extremely well. There is a growing humanitarian needs and increased complexity and duration of protracted crisis. In many humanitarian contexts, population already impacted by conflict, there are civil strife, pandemics, and other disasters that are also confronted by a growing hazard-related disaster risk. And this is often fueled and incentivized by climate change. Unfortunately, the short-term solutions are not sufficient to reduce this risk. And there is also a wide agreement that we need to work more together to address the root causes. We know that this is a reality. We know even more so in terms of impetus from the UN family and other actors as part of the UN reform. There is seen that there is a global momentum around the Sendai Framework for Action, the Agenda for Humanity, and the Sustainable Development Goals. Scaling up disaster risk reduction in humanitarian action is not about stretching already strained humanitarian funds, but in fact, we need additional funding and innovative funding and capacity for disaster risk reduction, but it needs to be integrated in the humanitarian response from the start. And while there is a general emerging consensus on the need to work more together across humanitarian and development sector, in practice, we know that there is still a long way to move ahead in many parts of this agenda and this context. These key messages were very much echoed in the consultations that took place for the development of the recommendation and the checklist. There were a very wide range of humanitarian as well as development partners that participated in the consultations. And the consultations included a regional workshop in Bangkok, but also a global workshop in Geneva, as well as additional consultations in Africa and in Arab states. So there has been an opportunity to really come together among different actors to see what was best to be reflected in these guidelines. And after developing the recommendation and the checklist, UNDRR has taken an initial step in order to share the guidelines and the checklist through a soft launch in October 2020. What is happening now is that we are testing the checklist in Pakistan, Haiti, and in Bangladesh, in collaboration with OCHA and RCO in Bangladesh. We can move to the next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I will not go into the details of the checklist and the recommendations, but I would like to provide you a very quick overview in terms of the document. The Humanitarian Program Cycle is used as a framework to organize different disaster risk reduction entry points. So, as a title of example, but just to take you through some key elements, we're starting with needs assessment and analysis. This is one of the most critical steps to ensure that humanitarian action is risk-informed. So it is important, of course, to conduct an in-depth risk analysis at the appropriate time, and risk information should inform the humanitarian needs overview. This should be complemented by linking to other existing risk information. So, for instance, through the UN Common Country Analysis, but also loss and damage information, recovery and peacekeeping assessment, but also conflict and development assessment. So basically, the opportunity to ensure that risk information are part of this analysis, it's key to the success and engagement in terms of sustainability of the process. I also welcome very much in this regards the new HPC guidelines that was issued in 2019, requiring all humanitarian needs overview to include key elements of risk assessment and analysis. This is really a very positive and good step in the right direction in order to ensure that this process moves forward. And we really hope that the checklist can be a useful complement to these new guidelines. As a next step, of course, it is important to review the current strategic plan, humanitarian response plans or other, and to ensure that it is risk-informed. Looking at resource mobilization, it's really an important aspect, and there are multiple opportunities to strengthen the focus on disaster risk reduction. Definitely, there is a need for more innovative financing models, such as forecast-based financing, but also risk transfer instruments, such as financial insurance, microinsurance, and microfinancing. Many of these new or promising models are in pilot stage, and what we need to do really is to be able to scale it up as much as possible and as fast as possible. The phase of monitoring provides an opportunity to articulate disaster risk reduction related targets and indicators in the humanitarian response plan, but also in the multi-year plans or in the framework of collective outcomes. So the reviews and evaluation should consider the success of programs on the basis of the extent in which risk has been reduced and considered in programming. And then, of course, there is the coordination mechanism that can also help scaling up disaster risk reduction. An example is to include new actors with disaster risk reduction experience in clusters and in HCT meetings, but also ensuring that disaster risk reduction is standing item on the HCT and cluster meeting agenda. The important step of advocate and of course the awareness in terms of disaster risk reduction, it is a fundamental step to promote inclusion of the topic in information management process, platform, and productions. So this is really a quick and also very simplified considerations in terms of the guidelines and how they really refer to the overall program cycle, humanitarian program cycle. Next slide, please. The guidelines are also exploring a number of existing good practices, and you can see them in the document. I'm not going to go into details now. In the slides, you do have a few examples. And what is important to see is that these emerging good practices will need to be and are going to be further complemented by the ongoing pilot testing in the 3 countries, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Haiti. And we're going to be hearing from my colleague a little bit later on the experience of the first country piloting. But also, we need to move ahead in order to see how we can have a bird view in terms of global review on how disaster risk reduction and risk has been integrated in the humanitarian needs overview and humanitarian response plans. And this is something that we're planning to undertake in 2021 in collaboration with OCHA. So I think these processes really are going to be allowing us to further expand and enhance the emerging good practices in scaling up disaster risk reduction in humanitarian action. Next slide, please. The slide is basically capturing what are going to be the next steps. So in 2021, the recommendation and checklist will be further fine-tuned and strengthened because it will be informed by the pilot testing and the global review on HNOs and HRPs. An interagency review group has been established to support this process, and the global review will create a form of baseline upon which further progress can be measured. The idea is that the pilot testing and the global review will inform an update of the checklist that then is going to be launched in the second quarter of 2021. We're also working with OCHA to roll out the checklist among humanitarian actors at the global level. The aim is for the checklist to be part of the formal HPC guidelines package for 2022 and of course beyond. Key recommendations have also been integrated in the IASC RG and HC handbook on leadership in humanitarian action, which will be finalized and shared with all the residents, the RC in 2021. We will also develop a training module in the coming month. And in the second half of the year, based on the initial rollout of the checklist, we will have the opportunity to dig deeper into key themes through a series of briefing notes on key topics of relevance to disaster risk reduction and humanitarian action. And this is going to be taking place also in close collaboration with our regional offices. Several of the regional platforms for disaster risk reduction that are taking place in 2021 will include events related to humanitarian action and the checklist. And really, as a key message to all of you, I would like to encourage you to share the checklist with your colleagues and partners, and also to let us know your thoughts in applying the checklist. We look forward very much to sharing the outcome of the pilots and the global review and the updated checklist with you in the coming months. So this is a very succinct overview of the guidelines, but I think that over the next presentation by Iria, that is from our regional office in Asia and Pacific, you're going to be able to touch base a little bit more with practical aspects as they are emerging through the piloting in Pakistan. So with this, I would like to pass the floor over to Iria, Martha, if this is fine by you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Paola, and hi, Iria. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Martha. Good morning or good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm sorry, I'm confused with the time zones. And thanks, Paola, for sharing that presentation and advancing on what are the next steps. What I would like to do now is share with you some of the findings that we identified early in the process in piloting these guidelines in the process of developing the humanitarian response plan for Pakistan 2021. So we really benefit from the collaboration of the OCHA regional office, as well as all the country team from the different agencies that participate in the humanitarian country team in Pakistan. So perhaps I will just share general findings and then if there are any questions, I can elaborate on them. One of the key findings that we noticed that there was a strong awareness of openness from all the sectors, actors, on including long-term resilient buildings aspects on the strategic objectives. And I think this is clearly reflected in the HRP. I think it's still in a final draft stage, not formally launched, but is quite an advanced draft, and this is clearly incorporated in the strategic objective. Another point on the findings is regarding to data and information. I think what we noticed, there's a lot of data on risk and disaster events and their impacts available, but the issue is that this data is really scattered in ways that really don't facilitate this application for risk analysis and for the humanitarian needs analysis and planning. For the need to strengthen what are the different the understanding of what are the different information needs from different actors and from different process, and also in encouraging building additional interoperability among the different information management and data sets that are right now available. So Paola had mentioned there is damage and loss information, there is humanitarian needs, different information products, but perhaps we really need to strengthen that interoperability and make this more digestible for all the different actors and more accessible. In terms of the guidance that had been referred, we found very helpful in this process the addendum on risk analysis for the HNO and HRP that was released at some point where we were in the process of doing the HNO and HRP in Pakistan. It was very helpful on understanding the relevance and the approaches for including risk analysis in the HNO, and how to go about developing scenarios on how the future events could compound and the impacts on the humanitarian needs and figures in people in need. However, we found sometimes there was not, we weren't that clear which data sources were the best to use and which analytical process we really was the best to conduct with the data we had available, and how then to use those projections in identifying the most appropriate informed responses. Perhaps that requires additional technical advice and support for the teams that are doing in a specific program cycle. Also, in terms of data, I think what will be very important now coming when starting implementation is that the monitoring data support not only knowing how the projects are being implemented, but also to recheck on those projections and if those events that were identified that could like recurring disaster events like regular floodings events or others, how are these really evolving, and how are they having a compounding impact on the humanitarian situation. So I think monitoring information is relevant to revise this risk analysis and how these projections are really were accurate and are really informing the response. So some of the recommendations that came out of the process in Pakistan were to consider the DRR in other HPC tools, and also it was referred to the HRP scoring criteria that donors are using and how this could be also reflected in those scoring criteria. Another important recommendations were the inclusion of anticipatory action as an option for bridging DRR and humanitarian action. And then there was a lot of consensus with the country team is ensuring that the HNO and the HRP information are feeding into the common country analysis and the Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework. And there's a strong opportunities there for Pakistan, because this year they will start preparing the common country analysis for the new cooperation framework. As a result of all this process, engaging with OCHA and the country team, the humanitarian country team has embraced the creation of a working group on anticipatory action on disaster risk management, and this is very well reflected in the response plan. And the anticipatory actions are really included and showcased as an innovative way for linking DRR and humanitarian response. In terms of the opportunities and the next steps, as we mentioned, the risk analysis and strengthening the interoperability of information is one opportunity that we are pursuing as well in the case of Bangladesh, where we are supporting jointly with OCHA and the RC office a working group, information management working group that will be co-chaired by the Ministry of Disaster Relief, Bangladesh, and the UN. And we look into improving the quality and usability of disaster-related information, not only looking at humanitarian needs related information, but also disaster statistics, risk information, and others. And then in Pakistan, there is an opportunity as part of the process of developing a global risk assessment framework and how this is relevant for the country. Since we are supporting a risk data inventory, so an initial step and initial assessment that is still to be launched. And then at the regional level in Asia Pacific, issue-based coalition that is like the regional mechanism for coordination for the different UN agencies, there has been a proposal to develop a risk marker. So we were looking at examples of the age and gender and age marker, and this will be a marker that will help like as a risk screening tool to make sure that we risk-proof all the plans at the different levels, and making sure that the humanitarian responses prevent the creation of new risks and address existing ones. So this is an ongoing development. There's nothing fully available at this stage, but it's being worked with UNEP, UN Women, and other agencies that are part of this risk coalition. So we'll stop here, and I'm happy to take any questions later on. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Ivria. So I think that it would be better to continue and to have as well the presentation on the opportunities for scaling up DRR in the Humanitarian Program Cycle from Greg Grimshin from OCHA. And then after we can open the floor, just colleagues, those that are connected, if you have questions, get prepared to raise your hand, and you can as well share the question with us through the chat box. So Gregory, over to you.
Thank you, Marta. And thank you, Yura and Paola. I think we're extremely grateful for the investments that UNDRR has made in developing and finalizing the guidance and supporting the initial rolling out and moving into 2021. I think it's a tremendous effort, and myself speaking from more kind of a 15+ years in the field, I can really see how this is going to be a great asset to strengthen the efforts in the field and working in this area. Much needed. And thanks also to all of you who have been able to contribute to the consultations over the past year, and that is going to be ongoing in this review process over the next few weeks. As Paola mentioned, in 2019, we did an extensive kind of review to enhance the HPC approach, mainly to really strengthen the multi-sectoral approaches to needs analysis and response. But also, what crept in there, of course, with the benefit of having this multi-stakeholder engagement is DRR considerations in the development of HNO and HRPs has been brought into the guidance bit by bit. So, and I'll just, put into the chat for your reference the link to the current facilitation package, which will soon also include the finalized DRR recommendations and checklists. But at the moment, we have, of course, the step-by-step guidance to the HPC. There's the HNO template and instructions, the JAF guidance, which did an extensive amount of consultation work amongst all the partners, which now incorporates risk and vulnerability drivers into the needs assessment and analysis efforts. And also the HRP 2021 template and instructions include just ensuring that there's stronger linkages between the HNO and the HRP, that there's a more risk-informed response, and that there's explicit mention of the factors that identified in the HNO, the hazards, the shocks and stresses, and that's brought into the response analysis. Then another key piece of work that came out quite late last year, and probably touches on some of the needs that Ira mentioned, was the challenge of taking these projections and making a more risk-informed response, and how we did that within the HPC cycle. There was an initial draft of a document that was pulled together, guidance on analyzing risk and determining the most likely evolution of the humanitarian situation. So using the disaster-related historical data, climate projections, just to identify the future hazards and how those can be addressed. So there's these, I can see a lot coming together. So it's kind of a good time for this also to kind of be the crowning piece for us there. Can you still hear me? The connection is dropped. Okay, great. I think what's, so at the end of this, kind of once it's finalized and reviewed, this 2021 version of the DRR checklist and recommendations will be, added to this list of guidance documents. And so we hope to have that kind of hopefully put in place back in April and May, finalized after the consultations. But even with that, and I think, it was nice to hear what happened in Pakistan was that there was the DRR working group that pulled together. We'll still need the capacity to implement this. So, that will be kind of a missing element. And looking at the recommendations coming out of Pakistan, what will come out of Haiti as well, will only add to the needs that we have. And that's, to really, having the staff in place that can won't be just awareness raising on DRR, but actually having staff that can do the analysis and compile the data and information and incorporate that into the needs analysis process. Again, I think Pakistan having the established working group is a good solution that was found there. In other cases and contexts, we'll have to look at what the capacity gaps are and the needs and resource requirements for the various contexts that are there and adjust accordingly to bring in the expertise or the accommodate with what we have to better inform the HPC processes based on the recommendations and the checklists that are now out there. Kind of linked to this, one thing that was brought into this phase of the review process was also having recommendations on training requirements. So we look forward to having that piece pulled together in the next couple of months, and to inform the HPC training that we will have in place come May, June, July with an OCHA and with partners, cluster coordinators, etc., that we can bring this into the relevant training exercises that take place, or workshops that take place at global and national level. Quite important. I think I'll stop there. I just recognize that we're past the half-hour mark and we want to have time for discussion, but I'll come in with any other comments and look forward to any questions that people have, colleagues have. Thank you.
Thank you, Gregory. That was interesting to see the links, and thank you as well for the facilitation package for the HPC for this 2021. It's useful to see what are the key documents that you are referencing there. So let me open the floor for questions and answers. There is only one question that was open and is about an interest on the PowerPoint presentation. So we can share with the colleagues that to which we send the invitation for this event, and I am pretty sure that they will share with all of you. So while we wait for the colleagues to share questions and answers, I will take advantage of my position facilitating this conversation, and I will open the floor. So it was very interesting. I think that it has been very interesting to follow this initiative since 2019, when the initial consultation started, when the initial draft of recommendation was done, and the checklist. So very consistent in terms of approach and consultation with a number of actors. And I was very interested to get your views, especially from a regional perspective in Asia Pacific, but as well from a global perspective in relation to change of culture. Because I think that introducing a DRR approach in the work we do in humanitarian is as well a change of culture, very close to what we are trying to do in terms of Nexus, changing how we work, where we put the focus and how we integrate. And I would like to get your views on what is being helpful, what is enabler from your perspective in the region, for example, in Asia and Pacific area, and as well from Gregory in terms of the HPC, how we can integrate those aspects in this frame, and as well from Paola from a global perspective, because I'm sure that we can learn quite a lot and we could be sharing perspectives. So I will stop here, and then after we start already having some questions, but I will be very interested in getting your views on that.
Thanks, Marta. Perhaps I can come in just from my own of the regional discussions, and then if you want others from the global level to complement. I have to say I'm quite new to all this humanitarian work. I have been working more in development and in DRR, so it was a first experience on getting more in touch and discussions with humanitarian actors. And I had to say I didn't really find any resistance. Especially when looking with the discussions with the different UN agencies, I think many of the sector agencies, they work in humanitarian response, but they also have a lot of different through which we address climate change adaptation, the risk reduction. I can, for example, think of FAO and all the programs they have in countries. So I didn't find there was such a, for them, such a big gap of difference, and on the mentality of how it's important addressing the vulnerabilities. So I didn't really find that there was such a big divide between these two worlds. And I found particularly helpful the perspective from the NGOs that were working in country in anticipatory action, because they really emphasize the importance for the risk information and how this is really, and having also the information from past events, how this is essential to estimate potential impacts and to have early actions and identify triggers. So I think that anticipatory action is really a very powerful link for how to. So it's not only like a different approach to humanitarian action, but it's also another approach to emphasize the importance of risk knowledge. So I found that was very, very important also to read any device if there were. And then another final reflection is from the government side. Again, I'm not very familiar how the overall relationship between the humanitarian sector and the governments are. But we had several discussions with the Disaster Management Authority in Pakistan. It was interesting to see for them, they didn't feel there was such a need to integrating disaster reduction into humanitarian response, because they are positioning, they are the central focal points, they are the ones also at the country level being the focal point for disaster reduction, and at the same time they are also the interlocutor for many humanitarian actors. So for them, that there wasn't such a divide. So I'm not familiar to how this is being approached in the whole region by humanitarian actors and development actors. This is just a general observation for one that was quite new on this humanitarian action. And I had to learn a lot, and I have to read a lot. I was reading all the guidance like many times. I found them very helpful. But I really need to read a lot to understand, and sometimes we use terms in a different way, and perhaps this is what makes appear that there is such a big divide, but I didn't find there is such a big divide. That's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Iria. I don't know, Paola or Gregory, if you want to add something to that?
You want to go?
Sure. I was just going to say that, I mean, I think, since going back since the World Humanitarian Summit and kind of in the backdrop of the 2030 Agenda, there's more of a common agreement between the humanitarian development actors to reduce the humanitarian need. And so there's been a lot of effort there. And I can see that coming through in colleagues working on the humanitarian needs overviews in different contexts, having development actors around the table, where the underlying factors, underlying drivers of humanitarian need are being identified for others, be it development actors, the banks to actually contribute to. So we're seeing that, especially last year, I think in the context of COVID and the Global Humanitarian Response Plan that was developed in that context, that we saw, let's say, it triggered some enhancement in that collaboration. There was a real need for that to take place. So that was actually good to see in that context. Yeah, I mean, there will be, efforts to draft up the common frameworks. I'm sorry, I just something the common frameworks, et cetera, that we have, and I think that we obviously, as humanitarians, we need to be engaging as much as possible in the CCA processes and informing them and the frameworks that emerge as well. Paola?
Yeah, thank you. It is an interesting question, and I think that the change in culture is something that is really coming towards us in a very prominent manner. One element that trigger a very strong impetus of this comprehensive vision that really is very much blurred in a positive sense between humanitarian and development and anticipatory action, as Iria was mentioning, is of course the COVID-19. And I think that the cost that we're faced with in terms of humanitarian losses, human losses, economic losses, has become so exponential, also due to climate change, that so many actors, whether we are in the UN scene or whether we are in the government scene, are looking for solutions, are looking for help in order to overall become more sustainable and create a continuity of the action. And we have seen it. We have seen it also by the willingness of a number of different actors really to give space and organize high-level events. For instance, last year in October, Sweden called for a high-level event where many WFP, OCHA, many of you, in fact, many agencies were present and participated to it, really focusing on anticipatory action in order to see what can be done to move ahead and to become more resilient and to support humanitarian efforts in a way in which it does not become something that is going to be dragging down the economy and the well-being of the people. So I think that the culture, it's the change in the culture and the move ahead in terms of viewing these topics is evolving very fast at the moment. One key challenge that we have collectively as UN, as NGO, as actors that are engaged in this field is how we can accelerate our action, accelerate the impact. And I don't know, I think I've been sitting in many panels where the discussions are leading towards acceleration and accelerator. We need to start from some key points, and the understanding, the risk knowledge, and also the tangible perspective of any work that we are doing as actors leading towards humanitarian action needs to be really at the heart of our focus, of our and to a certain extent, following the development of the guidelines and also the rich consultation that took place, what we saw emerging is really the wish to do something that it's focusing on results, is focusing precisely in accelerating this change. But I agree with you, and probably you will agree with me, that we're not quite there. So we need to continue working together with this.
Thank you, colleagues. Very interesting answers. And I think that your last question, Paola, about how we can accelerate the process is linked to one of the questions that we have in the chat that is coming from Fatma Samba, and is asking about if there is any possibility to introduce this UNDRR and OCHA partnership in some West and Central African countries. maybe you can explain a little bit how the checklist and the process, the initiative is being rolled out. So for the colleagues to know how they can get in contact at the regional or country level.
Absolutely. And on my side, maybe I can start, and Gregory, you can continue, but mostly I also would like to give the floor to Marlene, that is coordinating this process at our end. Yes, I think, and thank you very much for the question, and I really hope that, that we will be able to work together in West and Central African countries. Our main entry door in terms of UNDRR, but of course in collaboration with OCHA and other partners, is our regional office for the UNDRR that is based in Nairobi. What we have done is, of course, to work in collaboration with all our regional office and also with the OCHA colleagues to see how we can put this checklist and recommendations into practice. I think one important step that will also see the possibility for all countries to benefit from this approach is going to be the training package and the training material. And I think this is going to be one step that will allow the possibility for the country and for these countries in particular to come together, but mostly to move into action in terms of the implementation of the guidelines. But Marlene, please feel free to step in and share even more concrete elements that you might have at hand.
Yes, thank you, Paola, and thank you to Fatma for the question. I think there will also be some opportunities coming up for strengthened regional collaboration around this. We have the regional platforms for disaster risk reduction coming up in 2021. Where at least in several of them that I'm aware that UNDRR and OCHA have joint events planned already around some key themes related to humanitarian action and anticipatory action. So that would be something to look out for at regional level as well. As Paola said, we have the development of a training package and also integration of key elements of this into existing training modules in collaboration with OCHA. So that will be another opportunity. But then also in the next few months leading up to the finalization of the checklist, we'll collect a lot of the feedback and requests like this in terms of also planning the next steps in terms of the rollout and see how it can be supported through our regional offices. And finally, I think it's also key that it's not only about UNDRR and OCHA. There's also a wider range of partners that have been involved in this throughout the consultations and who are now involved in the Interagency review group as well. And so it will, I think, seeing how we can work together with this wider group of agencies in taking this forward will be really key as well, given their presence and engagement as key actors in the humanitarian program cycle at country level. So looking forward to taking that conversation forward with a wider range of agencies as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlene. I think we have comments from two colleagues on the chat box, but they're quite a little bit long. So we are in a little groups. I'm going to ask them, please, to unmute and share the comment or question. So I see Lynn from UNFPA, and then after I see as well Rahel Steenbach from UN Women. So do you want to please unmute and share? I think that is going to be more friendly and to listen to you. Lynn, can you share your comment? Oh, there's a lot of noise at her end. So in any case, Lynn is a member of the resource group number 4, and she was sharing the fact that she finds that it's very it's interesting to have this discussion in the frame of the resource group number 4 in relation to climate and other important aspects that are very integrated into the global nexus discussion, preparedness, risk reduction, and so on and so forth. So great. And then I hope we will continue the collaboration because I think that we have done that in the past years. And there is a question and a comment from Rahel. Rahel, can you unmute yourself and share?
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Rahel Steinbach, and I'm Program Specialist on Disaster Risk Reduction for UN Women. And I put in the chat box a pilot program that we started in the Lake Chad Basin region last year. And it is a program that focuses on strengthening women's and girls' resilience, disaster and climate resilience in the context of humanitarian crisis. I mean, in this specific context, we're talking about the Lake Chad Basin crisis, but our experience really has been now having worked with women's organizations on this topic in the Lake Chad Basin context, that these same organizations are working with a wide range of humanitarian but also disaster risk reduction partners anyhow, and is the same for many other organizations on the ground. I'm thinking of organizations working on supporting people with disabilities, but also the LGBTQI+ communities, as well as a wide range of other thematic civil society and grassroots organizations. So these are in any case working in humanitarian crisis in some manner or another on strengthening resilience and also addressing in the specific case of Lake Chad Basin, the context of religious extremism. And so I just wanted to say how timely I think this discussion is, how important this discussion is. We as DRR and humanitarian practitioners and as the organizations that have the thematic mandates tend to work in silos, but that's not the reality on the ground. And if we want to address effectively the preoccupations on the ground, it is high time that we coordinate better together and bring our respective networks and expertise to the table. And this is true for the humanitarian and DRR partners, but also for those agencies, of course, such as UN Women, that brings in the gender equality and women leadership expertise, and for the others, such as FAO, I'm thinking agriculture, so absolutely critical in climate and disaster resilience and in humanitarian crisis, and many others. I'm seeing Jen Stevens here from UNICEF, you know, the dimensions that touch upon children and youth. Children don't care about whether, you know, they are facing disaster or climate issues or humanitarian issues. They have their immediate needs to be addressed, and it's the duty of all of us to make sure that this happens. So thank you for this discussion, and thanks for the time that I was given to talk about this.
Thank you, Rahel, for sharing those views. I think that the main part of the audiences will agree that in general terms, the population is not so interested to know if from where we are coming and what is our specific side analysis, but they want a good response. So colleagues, questions or comments? We are approaching the end. We are 5 minutes to the end of this session. I cannot see if somebody has...
Sorry, I'm just, my name's Karen from ICFA in the regional in Asia Pacific. So this is very welcome discussion and initiative, so thank you. And as colleagues have already presented, very topical to the region. I just had a couple of questions. I was wondering if there's been a discussion in the development with the DRR integration into humanitarian about how this could support or accelerate the localization discussion as well, given as it's already been presented that so many of the actors in this space on the ground, civil society, are operating across that nexus, and for them this is a reality every day. So if there was that coming up in the discussion, and also if there's been reflections from humanitarian donors about their welcoming or responsiveness to the integration of DRR into the HRP plans. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenya. So can you tell us what is your, I mean, you're coming from Asia or Pacific?
Oh, sorry, from ICFA, the International Council of Volunteer Agencies.
Oh, good.
Sorry, and then I should preface as well, sorry, I haven't been part of the consultation, so I've been new to this discussion specifically. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenya. So anybody wants to answer this important point about the linkages with the localization and the local actors? in relation to this agenda. There has been any conversation, or how you're linking this initiative with local actors?
Yes, I can see that Marlene wants to take the. Marlene, go ahead. And
yeah, sure. I mean, I think that's something. It's definitely something that is addressed and discussed. It's in the longer recommendations document, and those linkages are definitely made, and something we see a strong potential. But I think it's something that we can develop further, and we're also looking forward to seeing from the pilots of the checklist that are ongoing in terms of any kind of lessons emerging on that. But it's also an area where we would really appreciate further thoughts from partners really working in the field. So I think any feedback that you have on that and how we can further make those linkages, I think would be really valuable, because yeah, I mean, UNDRR is not a major humanitarian actor. We don't have a country presence, and we will definitely rely on partners to help us articulate those linkages in the implementation of the checklist. So but definitely looking forward to continuing that dialogue. And I think it's also something that can be, as Paola mentioned, we have an interagency review group that we've set up to support the global review of HNOs and HRPs this year, and several of you have already indicated an interest in joining that. So I think that's definitely one of the topics that could be further elaborated on there as well. So I really appreciate that comment. And I think if I understood the second point or the second question correctly, it was about donors' perspectives on integrating DR in humanitarian response plans. And I think there would be a lot to say, but I think one of the things that we have, or one of the key points about this is it's not necessarily, that's not like the only way to integrate risk and DRR by having standalone DRR activities as part of the humanitarian response plan. And I don't know if Greg has any further. I know Greg often mentions Afghanistan as an example of, for example, how risk analysis in the HNO can also inform wider. Well, maybe Greg, I should hand over to you to talk about that specific example from Afghanistan. But I think the key message is really that it's not about competing for already scarce humanitarian funds. It's about finding additional funding through a variety of sources within but also outside the HRP. But I don't know, Greg, if you have anything further on that with Afghanistan. Sure. Or wider points.
No, maybe just a point is that the enhanced HPC guidance kind of came out from certainly donor interest in having much more evidence-based HRPs being developed. So there was an extensive effort, put into the needs analysis, et cetera. And so it's not just about integrating DRR into projects, activities that are planned by clusters, but it's also about working together at the country level, bringing development partners around the table when we're discussing the evolution of the crisis or the humanitarian needs, the underlying factors, et cetera, and then taking the necessary steps to anticipate those. And it doesn't necessarily mean the integration of DR the way we might think of it, but there needs to be clear linkages, certainly through the process and the communities working together between the HNO and CCA, between the frameworks and the HRP, to best inform each other. And I think we pay some recognition to that. All the HNOs and HRPs need to be, or HRPs need to be identifying the linkages to the plans that are in place in country, be it contingency plans, to ideally the frameworks that exist as well, that in the common country assessments that are taking place. They need to be referencing those and ensure that those are incorporated into the background. So I think there's such a range of contexts that we're working in as well, so it'll be handled differently in each context. I think that's something else that needs to be stressed. that flexibility needs to be recognized. So maybe in some places it could be very much integrated, especially where we're looking at transitional plans in different contexts where countries are coming out of crises. Thanks.
Thank you, Gregory, and thank you, Marlene. So I think that we have reached the end of this session. I wanted to close it acknowledging for the effort and for joining this conversation to the fourth of you, Marlene, Paola, Gregory, and Ivia. Thank you very much for approaching us, for making all the work for the presentations and for sharing your views and experiences. Thank you as well to the participants. As we have said, we are recording this session and we will be sharing with other resource group and community of practice members. And I'm pretty sure there will be more interest. And just for the members to know, there is this initiative as well launched in the frame of this pilot, and there is a technical working group that has been generated for the piloting of the recommendations. So I'm pretty sure we will hear back on the learnings and the advances of the initiative. So thank you, everybody. Hope you will have a great rest of the week. Thank you for the participation, for the interest, and looking forward listening to the learnings in the coming months. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much.